The applause died mid-clap. Ellen DeGeneres, who had spent 2 decades perfecting the art of making people laugh, found herself standing in complete silence on her own stage. The microphone in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. What had started as a routine Be Kind segment was about to become something that would change everything she thought she knew about teenage heroes. It was Thursday afternoon at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank. The Ellen Show was taping its 3rd episode of the week, and the energy was electric as always. Ellen bounced onto her familiar blue stage wearing a crisp white blazer and that infectious smile that had made her America's favorite talk show host. The audience was primed for laughter, celebrity guests, and the kind of feel-good content that made Ellen's show a daily dose of sunshine for millions. Today, Ellen announced to the cheering crowd, "We're celebrating young people who are making a difference in their communities." The Be Kind segment was always a favorite. Stories of teenagers helping elderly neighbors, students raising money for animal shelters, kids spreading joy in hospitals. These were the moments that reminded everyone that kindness still existed in the world. Our first guest today is 16-year-old David Rodriguez from East Los Angeles. Ellen continued, her voice warm with anticipation. "David, come on out here." David emerged from backstage and the audience erupted in supportive applause. He was tall for his age but carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed older than his 16 years. He wore his best button-down shirt, clearly chosen for this moment, and his dark hair was carefully combed. But there was something in his eyes, a weight that most teenagers don't carry, that made Ellen study him a little longer than usual. "David, welcome to the show," Ellen said, giving him a warm hug as he reached center stage. "Tell everyone what you've been doing in your community." David shifted slightly, clearly nervous under the bright lights and the gaze of 300 audience members. "Well," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "every day after school I set up in the lobby of my apartment building and help younger kids with their homework." The audience let out a collective awe, and Ellen's face lit up with genuine delight. "That is so sweet. How did this get started?" "I noticed a lot of kids in my building were struggling with their schoolwork," David explained. "Their parents work multiple jobs and get home really late, so the kids were just falling behind. I figured I could help." Ellen nodded enthusiastically. "And you do this for free?" "Of course," David replied, as if the question surprised him. "Education should be available to everyone." The audience applauded again, but Ellen caught something in David's tone. There was a maturity there, a deeper understanding of struggle that seemed beyond his years. "How many kids do you help?" "Usually about 12 to 15 each day. Different ages, different subjects, math, English, history, science, whatever they need." "David, that's incredible," Ellen said, but she was studying his face more carefully now. "What time do you usually finish helping these kids?" David hesitated for just a moment. "Around 7 or 8 at night." "Wow, that's a long day. And then you go home and do your own homework?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Yeah, something like that." Ellen's instincts, honed by years of interviewing, picked up on something. The way David's eyes flickered slightly when she asked about his schedule. The careful phrasing of "something like that," the slight tension in his shoulders. "David," Ellen said gently, "tell me about your family. Do they support what you're doing?" This time, the pause was longer. David looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up at Ellen. "My mom thinks it's great. And your dad?" David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The audience was still smiling, still caught up in the feel-good nature of the story. But Ellen could sense there was more beneath the surface. She'd interviewed enough people to recognize when someone was carrying a burden they weren't ready to share. "Well, David," Ellen said, deciding not to push, "what you're doing is absolutely beautiful. You're making a real difference in these kids' lives." "Thank you," David said quietly. "But honestly, they help me too. When I see them finally understand a math problem or write a great essay, it reminds me why education matters so much." That phrase again, the weight of understanding behind it. Ellen made a decision that would change the direction of this entire segment. "David," she said, "I want to show everyone something." Ellen gestured to the large screen behind them. "Our producers put together a little video about David's work. Let's take a look." The video began with footage of David in his apartment building's lobby. It was a modest space with worn carpeting and fluorescent lighting. But David had transformed one corner into a makeshift classroom. Small tables and chairs were arranged in a circle, whiteboards propped against the walls, and boxes of donated school supplies organized neatly on shelves. The camera showed David working with a 7-year-old girl on her reading, patiently sounding out words with her. Then an 11-year-old boy struggling with fractions, David breaking down the concept into simple visual examples. Kid after kid, David moved between them with endless patience and genuine care. But as the video continued, Ellen noticed something the producers had captured that maybe they hadn't intended to highlight. In several shots, David looked exhausted. Not the normal tiredness of a busy teenager, but the deep fatigue of someone carrying too much responsibility. There were dark circles under his eyes, and in one shot, when he thought no one was looking, his shoulders sagged with something that looked like the weight of the world. The video concluded with testimonials from some of the younger children. "David helped me pass my spelling test," one little girl exclaimed. "He makes math fun," added a boy who couldn't have been more than 8. "David is like a big brother to all of us," said another. As the video ended, and the audience applauded enthusiastically, Ellen noticed that David was wiping his eyes. Not tears of joy or embarrassment, but something deeper, something that spoke of struggles far beyond what a 16-year-old should have to handle. "David," Ellen said softly, "that was beautiful. Those kids clearly love you." "They're amazing," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "They work so hard even when things are difficult at home. They deserve every opportunity to succeed." Again, that understanding of difficulty that seemed to come from personal experience. Ellen made another decision, one that would take this conversation into territory neither of them expected. "David," she said, "can I ask you something? And I want you to be completely honest with me." David nodded, though Ellen could see him bracing himself slightly. "What time do you actually get home each night?" The question hung in the air. The audience was still smiling, still caught up in the positive energy of the segment, but Ellen's tone had shifted slightly. David looked directly into her eyes, and in that moment something passed between them, a recognition, an understanding that the facade was about to come down. "I don't go home after the tutoring," David said quietly. Ellen leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" David took a deep breath. "I go to work." The studio fell silent, not the comfortable silence of a touching moment, but the heavy silence of a revelation that changed everything. "What kind of work?" Ellen asked gently. "I work at a burger place downtown, night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The audience gasped audibly. Ellen's hand went to her heart. "David, are you telling me you tutor kids until 8 at night, then work an overnight shift at a restaurant?" "Yes, ma'am." "And then you go to school?" "School starts at 7:30. I usually get there around 7 to clean up and change clothes in the bathroom." Ellen stepped back slightly, trying to process what she was hearing. "David, when do you sleep?" "I catch a couple hours between classes sometimes, or on weekends." "How long have you been doing this?" David's voice became even quieter. "About 8 months." Ellen looked out at her audience. 300 faces stared back at her, no longer smiling, no longer caught up in the feel-good nature of what they thought they were watching. They were witnessing something else entirely. "David," Ellen said, and now her voice was different too. Not the polished voice of a talk show host, but the voice of a woman who was genuinely concerned about the child standing in front of her. "Why? Why are you working overnight and still tutoring and going to school?" David looked down at his hands again. When he looked back up, there were tears in his eyes that he was trying hard to control. "My dad lost his job 6 months ago," he said. "Construction work dried up, and he's been looking for something else, but it's been really hard. My mom works 2 jobs, but it's not enough. We're 3 months behind on rent, and if we don't catch up soon, we're going to lose our apartment." The silence in the studio was complete. Now Ellen felt her own eyes filling with tears. "The kids I tutor," David continued, "some of them live in our building. If we get evicted, I won't be able to help them anymore, and they need help. Some of them are really struggling, and if they fall too far behind," his voice trailed off. "David," Ellen said, stepping closer to him, "you're 16 years old. This shouldn't be your responsibility." "But it is," David replied with a strength that surprised everyone in the studio. "Those kids don't care how old I am. They just need someone to believe in them. And my family, they've sacrificed so much for me. My mom works cleaning offices at night and at a grocery store during the day. My dad is out looking for work every single day. I can't just sit back and watch everything fall apart." Ellen reached out and took David's hands in hers. "You said you help the kids with their homework because education should be available to everyone. But David, what about your education? When do you do your own homework?" "I manage," David said quietly. "That's not what I asked." David was quiet for a long moment. "I do it at work sometimes, when things are slow, Or I stay up on weekends. My grades have dropped some, but I'll catch up. Ellen turned to face her audience. 300 people sat in complete silence, many of them crying openly. This wasn't what they'd come to see. They'd expected to feel good about a teenager helping younger kids. Instead, they were witnessing something that broke their hearts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellen said, her voice shaking slightly, "I want you to understand what we're hearing right now. David Rodriguez works overnight at a restaurant, goes to school during the day, and then tutors children for free every afternoon and evening. He's doing this because his family is facing eviction and because he believes these kids deserve help with their education. He's 16 years old." The applause that followed wasn't the enthusiastic clapping of entertainment. It was the slower, more meaningful applause of people recognizing something extraordinary and heartbreaking at the same time. But Ellen wasn't done. "David," she said, "I need to ask you something else. The money you make at your night job, what do you do with it?" "I give it to my parents to help with rent and bills." "All of it?" "Yeah. Well, except for bus fare to get to work and back." Ellen closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she looked directly into the camera. "I want everyone watching this to understand something," she said. "This young man is working overnight shifts and giving every penny to his family to help keep their home. He's tutoring children for free because he believes in the power of education, even though his own education is suffering because he doesn't have time to sleep. And he does all of this without asking for help, without complaining, without expecting recognition." She turned back to David. "How did you end up on our show today?" "One of the moms whose kid I tutor nominated me," David said. "She said I deserved to be recognized." "And what did you think when you found out you'd been selected?" David smiled for the first time since his revelations began. "I thought it would be nice for the kids to see that people notice when you try to help others. I wanted them to know that kindness matters." That's when Ellen broke. Not the careful, controlled emotion that talk show hosts sometimes display for effect. This was raw, genuine, overwhelming emotion that she couldn't contain, even if she wanted to. She stepped forward and pulled David into a hug that lasted long enough for the cameras to capture every tear that fell down her face. "David," she whispered, but her wireless microphone picked it up clearly, "you're not just helping those kids with homework, you're teaching us all what real courage looks like." When she finally pulled back, Ellen looked out at her audience, then directly into the camera. "David Rodriguez is 16 years old," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "And he just reminded every single one of us what it means to put others before yourself. But you know what? It's our turn to help him." She turned back to David. "I want you to know that your work story ends today. You're not going back to that overnight job." David's eyes widened. "But Ms. DeGeneres, I need that job. My family needs that money." "I know," Ellen said gently, "which is why my show is going to cover your family's rent for the next year, all of it, so you can focus on being 16 and going to school, and yes, continuing to help those kids if you want to, but not because you have to choose between their education and your own." The audience erupted. 300 people rose to their feet in spontaneous applause that went on for nearly 2 minutes, but Ellen held up her hand for silence because she wasn't finished. "There's more," she said. "I've been working with some friends, and we're setting up a proper tutoring center in your neighborhood. A real space with real resources where you and other high school students can help younger kids. And David, if you want the job, you're hired as the director, with a salary that will help your family while still giving you time to be a student." David stared at her in disbelief. I can't." "Yes, you can," Ellen said firmly, "because here's what I've learned today, David. Sometimes the people who give the most are the ones who have the least, and when we find those people, we don't just celebrate them, we support them." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This," she said, "is from all of us here at the Ellen Show. It's enough to catch up on your family's rent and bills, plus a little extra to help get back on your feet." David took the envelope with trembling hands. When he opened it and saw the check inside, his knees nearly gave out. Ellen steadied him gently. "David," she said, "your story today reminded all of us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear a teenager's backpack and stay up all night making sure other people have what they need." The applause continued, but now it was mixed with the sounds of people crying, calling out encouragement, expressing their support for this young man who had accidentally revealed the depth of his sacrifice on national television. As the show cut to commercial, Ellen kept her arm around David's shoulders. Off camera, she whispered something to him that the audience couldn't hear, but whatever she said made him smile through his tears for the first time that day. 6 months later, the David Rodriguez Learning Center opened in East Los Angeles. It serves over 200 children each week, staffed by high school and college volunteers who are paid for their tutoring work. David graduated as valedictorian of his high school class, and his speech focused on the power of education to change not just individual lives, but entire communities. Ellen DeGeneres kept every promise she made that day. But more than that, she learned something from David Rodriguez that changed how she approached every subsequent show. Sometimes the most powerful moments aren't planned. They happen when someone's courage accidentally reveals a truth too big to ignore, and when the rest of us choose to respond with the same generosity of spirit that we've just witnessed. The homework helper became something more than a feel-good story. He became a reminder that real heroes often work in shadows, asking for nothing, giving everything, believing that making things better for others is simply what you do when you have the chance.